going to keep this fairly formal. Nicole and I are going to share our story of what we've been doing so far to decolonize and indigenize PLAR at TRU. We want to keep this somewhat informal, so all three of us will be monitoring the chat. That'll be, well, actually, I don't think I will be because you can see my screen now. So that'll be Nicole and Andrew. And if you have any questions or comments, don't hesitate to put it in the chat. And there are two places in the presentation where we're going to ask you to put in some information questions, and we'll take a peek at that. So I hope that'll work well. And we wanted to start first today with a land acknowledgement. And how does that look on your screen? The reason I'm asking is because the top's cut off for me. Is it cut off for everybody?
It's slightly cut off, but if everyone clicks OK on closed caption and transcript is being generated, it should go away.
Okay. So we'll start with the land acknowledgement. And today, Nicole, Andrew, and Andrew also, I'm not sure if you introduced yourself. Andrew works at TRU as well, and he's a very active member of BC Plan. Many of you will know who he is. But today we all come from this beautiful place of Kamloops to Secwepemc, and the TRU, the Thompson Rivers University campus, is on the traditional territory of the Secwepemc people. And I invite you in the chat to put in the lands that you're residing on today. Just a few words I wanted to share with the land acknowledgement. So often we'll start our land acknowledgements to say that we're privileged to live, work, play, and to learn in the place that we're residing. And for us personally here, it's Kamloops, also known as Kamloops, but also our second campus in Williams Lake. We are on the territory there of the Tahalk people. And then in our region, we have the St'át'imc, the Nklaplim, the Newhalk, the Silcoteen, the Decal, and the Silex people. So we cover a fairly large territory. And I wanted to come back to the land acknowledgement and the one word that I used earlier, and that's the living, the working, the playing, but the learning. And that's what I wanted to draw our attention to a Secwepemc phrase, meaning we come together to help one another. And that was our hope today, is to share a little bit about the journey that we've been on, and to, at the end of Nicole's and I's presentation, to have a conversation about what questions and comments do you have, but we'd also like to learn about what you've been doing to decolonize and indigenize, and what has been some of the actions you've taken, what's worked, what hasn't worked, and just to have a more wholesome conversation. I think, yeah, over to you now, Nicole.
Okay. Hello, everyone. White Ensquest, Nicole. My name is Nicole. And yeah, we're just going to, well, I'll introduce myself actually first. As Andrew had said, I'm the manager here in PLAR at TRU. I've been in the PLAR department for many years now. Before being a manager, I was a PLAR advisor, so working directly with the students. And it's been really neat through all of these years, just seeing things progress, and under Susan's leadership, just taking this new path with indigenization and decolonization. So yeah, just run quickly by you. There's some items that we'll be covering, things that most or all of you will be familiar with, such as UNDRIP and truth and reconciliation, but we find that it's always great to have this reminder. We hope this is true for you as well. So we're going to talk about PLAR in general, or RPL, or how this can help in terms of indigenization, decolonization. We'll go through a brief history of colonization, and as I said, UNDRIP and truth and reconciliation. Kind of where things started in this direction for us in 2018 to where we're at now, and where we're looking into the future. What we've learned going through this process, and as I said, into the future and going forward, And then, as Susan mentioned, we'd love to have a discussion with you all and share some of our thoughts around this. Okay, so we have a quotation here from Dr. Lana Ray. She's the Indigenous Research Chair in Decolonial Futures at Lakehead University, and from what we understand is transitioning to Athabasca. So what she has said is overall, PLAR and Indigenous knowledge systems share the epistemological assumption that learning can happen anywhere and at any time. So just by reading this, we know we already have a good head start in this direction. Susan will speak a bit more to the benefits of PLAR in terms of the decolonization and indigenization.
I love this quote that we've used because it is such a foundational understanding philosophy for, I don't know whether I should say most PLAR programs or all PLAR programs, but that understanding that learning happens anywhere and at all times. And to anchor our talk with this understanding is really important. Before we go into some of the overview of what we've done and how we've done it, we wanted to talk about a few really fundamental ideas about PLAR. We're going to start with how PLAR can help and some of the assumptions that we have with PLAR. So we know that PLAR is considered as a large component of accessibility and equity. It does not discriminate on how knowledge and skills are acquired. We also know that students that go through PLAR are more likely to complete their college or their university credential. And it doesn't matter what research you look at, whether it's the CALE research that was done in 2020 or the earlier stuff before that, which was done in, I think, about 2006. We know that this holds true for the American PLAR programs, but we also were curious about what those findings would be for Canadian schools. So we took TRU as an example, and we worked with our institutional planning and excellence team to look at how does PLAR impact students at TRU. And we know that our findings echo the same as the CALE, the PLAR, the PLA boost research that was done, that students that go through PLAR are more likely to have stronger completion rates, but they also have a higher GPA. And also for some faculty and programs, they have a quicker completion rate and helps with some of the accessibility and some of the barriers. So we know that from the TRU perspective with some pretty strong statistics. We also always talk about PLAR saving time and money. And this conversation comes up a lot, how PLAR increases self-esteem and empowerment and provides students with that awareness of strengths and areas for growth. But as we come into the space, we started to question this in about 2018. And it's not that we weren't questioning it before then, but 2018, it came to a head for a few reasons that Nicole's going to go into next. But for us, we really started to question about the accessibility and the equity. And is this really the case for Indigenous students? And how much is this the case? And what can we do different or better? So Nicole's going to talk a little bit about the truth and reconciliation and the UNDRIP and the calls to action. And then we're going to share a little bit more on our perspective of what is decolonization and indigenization.
Yeah, so we just wanted to take just a little bit of the presentation to just reflect a bit on, the history and how Canada and United Nations came to, start to do better in this area. So as many of you know, in 2008, the Canadian government started interviewing over 6,000 residential school survivors and their loved ones. There were 94 calls to action centered around 5 principles, and those were truth, justice, memory, reparation, and recognition. And in 2015, the TRC released its final report. There's also the United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, also known as UNDRIP, And there's quite a few areas in there that speak to education in specific. One area notes that Indigenous peoples have the right, without discrimination, to the improvement of their economic and social conditions, including the areas of education, employment, vocational training, and retraining. So we, as we were looking at these documents and these initiatives, we realized that we couldn't just use them as check boxes, as many people have understood. We needed to take action around them.
Thank you. For me personally, at this time, it was probably about 2016, 2017. The Canadian Senator Marie Sinclair, who was such worked so hard on these documents and on the calls to action. He came to TRU and did a presentation on the Truth and Reconciliation, the calls to action. And it was very profound. And in 2018, when I came into PLAR, it was one of those questions that we were asking about, as Nicole said, we know we need to do better. And it can't just be simple check boxes just to say we understand what truth and reconciliation is, but we had to live it, we had to action it somehow. And so about this time, we began to ask, what does this mean for PLAR, and how can we do better? And what has been the impact of colonization on the Indigenous students that we're working with? And so this next slide I'm going to show, you can see there's a content warning here. This is the one part of our presentation I struggled with the most. I wasn't sure if I should include this or I wanted to include this, and I am going to include it. It's an image of a painting that depicts Indigenous children being taken from their families. And for us to go into some of that, moving from the understanding or the beginnings of an understanding on what is Canada's truth, what is reconciliation, and what are our calls to action. This image I'm about to show you had a profound impact on me, an emotional impact. And for those of you who want, or maybe worried, I don't know how to word this, I'm going to just go to that next slide so you can see what I'm talking about. And if you want to turn your head away, by all means, do so. And I will let you know when we've removed from that slide. So this slide is from the Cree artist, the image that we're seeing here, Kent Monkman. He's from the Fish River Band in northern Manitoba. And this image references the horrors of the residential school. As I said, it's not just emotional, but it's very thought-provoking. And he explores in his work, and he has some amazing work out there, some of it controversial. I can't shy away from that. But for me, this particular painting really struck a chord with me. It shows the emotional impact of colonization. His work often has some sexuality in it, but this one in particular looks at the loss, the resilience, the complexities of historic and contemporary Indigenous experiences. And you'll note in this image, he's speaking about the 1800s right up through to the 1990s with the residential schools, but he's put the people in the images in more contemporary clothing. And that's because he was making a statement that it wasn't just the residential schools that have had that profound impact and multi-generational impact, but it's also the 60 scoop and the child welfare system of today. So that was very intentional to take more of a contemporary look. But some of you may have seen this image with more traditional views in it. So not just the clothing, but where people are living and taking them from across Canada and the traditional homes of the Indigenous people. So we know that for hundreds of years, Canada has been walking a very destructive, depowering path. We know part of the colonization is that feelings and actions of superiority and our ways of knowing, the colonizers' ways of knowing, that epistemology and the learning, the pedagogies that come with that. And because we think or have thought that they're superior, and this is what the Truth and Reconciliation really helped to surface, Any other ways of knowing were less than and didn't have the same power, didn't have the same privilege. And we've all encountered these colonial mindsets in various shapes and form. And to be labeled, for me, some of the words that really struck with me, the first time I heard Justice Murray Sinclair use the word cultural genocide, I was, yeah, it impacted me quite deeply. So I'm going to switch from that slide now and just go to our definitions of how we're using the words decolonization and indigenization. We've noticed that there's a lot of different ways people use these words and the meaning they put behind it, and sometimes they even use them interchangeably. So we thought it was important to share how we're using these words and just to give you a little bit of context. So for decolonization, it's the deconstruction, the surfacing, the understanding of colonial ideas. And it's that challenging that superiority and dominance of Western thought as being the only way, the best way. And to consider how to change some of the misconceptions about other ways of knowing and the prejudices and the assumptions that come with that. And really important for us, it's been to learn about ourselves and our colonial mindsets in these relationships to the communities where we live. So it's to Kamloops, it's to help, it's Statlium, it's those nations that we have the privilege to work with, but to learn from them. And that learning has been so important for the work we currently do with prior learning and the work we hope to do in the years moving ahead. And then indigenization is different for us. It's like another step along the path. It's that deliberately weaving or braiding together of the knowledge system so that the learners can come to understand and appreciate multiple ways of knowing and different worldviews. It's that integration of Indigenous knowledge, the worldviews, the practices in the university structures. And these words are quite loaded. So when you think about the governance that we have, how we teach, how we assess that teaching, how we learn, how we understand how people learning, even how we do our research is so embedded in both conscious and subconscious colonial practices. It's that integration that's so important in that awareness. And then this next bullet I thought was really important to include as well, because it's that inclusion of Indigenous ways of knowing, but also the thinking, the feeling, the being, the belonging. And this image in the middle is a TRU image that's synonymous with indigenization at TRU. You can see the coyote in the middle, at the bottom of the picture, and the coyote in the Shrupnik culture is the creator, is the trickster, is the teacher. And the coyote in this image is on his educational journey. And surrounding the coyote is some really important holistic philosophies on us all being interconnected and interrelated, with the dark blue circle being the water, the sage circle being the air, the brown is the land, and then the sun and the moon are the yellow and the orange.
Yeah, just in terms of the decolonization and indigenization, some of my learning around that too was that they need to both happen. If we just indigenize and not decolonize, then we're bringing Indigenous people into an institution or organization that's still colonial. So that was a big aha for me to kind of say, okay, this is why both of these need to happen. So yeah, this two-eyed seeing slide. So this is a guiding principle that was brought forward in 2004 from a respected elder from Nova Scotia. His name is Albert Marshall. And what he was getting across here was that it was the goal of having mutual respect for each other's strengths and ways so that we can be in this world and leave this world in a better place. So, you know, Susan talked about the European Western ways as, once being seen or looked at as being superior. This two-eyed seeing is, there can be strengths from both sides, and how can we see with both eyes and bring that forward to make our world stronger. So we think of this often when we're going on this path. So we just briefly wanted to touch on, just to give a little bit of context, the PLAR pathways that we offer at TRU, just to so that there can be just an idea of when we are supporting Indigenous students, the options that are there for them and there for all students. So we have a competency-based portfolio, which is kind of a student's demonstration of their broader learning background. So it's not specific to a course. And the credits that come from that is applied to their electives in their program. So students can gain, a block of credits. So potentially 3, 6, or up to, 40, or even potentially in our Bachelor of General Studies over half of their degree. And then we also have course-based portfolios, which is where students do challenge specific exams, or specific courses. That can be through a variety of different ways. Usually it's through a written portfolio, but it can also be through an interview. It could be through an exam. It could be through a project or observation. So course-based portfolio is kind of a larger umbrella over different kind of frameworks and ways that that the students' knowledge and skills pertaining to a course can be demonstrated. And then there's just our straightforward challenge exams. And so that's similar to a student, taking a final exam for the course. It really only fits for certain courses, such as maybe like accounting, languages, those kinds of things. And then we have our credit bank, which is kind of taking, well, we have our formal credit bank, which is on our website, and it's we have articulation agreements with partners where the learning is pre-assessed and the credits are determined, so that when students come to TRU, the credits are there and ready for them, already assessed. We also do it where, say, a student comes in and has maybe a computing certification and they say, hey, can I get credit for this Microsoft certification? So we then send it to a computing subject matter expert, and they can take a look and see if it equates to some PLAR credits. So that's also a part of our credit bank. So it's very brief overview, just so that we can kind of get back to the focus of our discussion today, but we just wanted to offer that for some context.
So next, Nicole and I are going to talk about what we've been doing to decolonize and indigenize. And when I say we, it's the royal we, meaning we have an amazing team we work with, but increasingly we've been reaching out to various Indigenous communities, as you'll see towards the end of this part of the presentation, to really include them in the decision-making on what we're assessing and how we're assessing it. But way back in 2018, before the pandemic, when we really started to look at this, it was that feeling of being lost. As Nicole shared with the Truth and Reconciliation and the calls to action, we knew we needed to do better. And one of the pieces that really inspired us was we wanted to know specifically how Indigenous students were doing. And we didn't know how we were doing. We didn't know what we needed to do or how we needed to do it. And so we reached out and did a research project asking students that had self-identified as being Indigenous, did they feel safe going through the TRU PLAR process? And what was that like? Did they feel like they could share their Indigenous ways of knowledge and knowledge systems, and that coming to learning? And so we did a series of interviews with students that had gone through the PLAR process and the people in their surrounding world that had supported them in this process. And this just gave us a little bit of a sense of how were we doing and what barriers did we have in place. And you'll notice on a few of these slides, I'll have bullets underneath the statement to say some of those feelings that we had, because we were so lost and confused, didn't know where to start. So we started to do this research, and surprisingly, many of the students said they felt quite safe sharing their Indigenous knowledge systems and understanding in their competency-based PLAR. But when we went back and looked at their portfolios and what they'd presented, very few of them actually had included it. And so that made us think that our research wasn't maybe that well designed and we needed to dig a little bit deeper. That led us to a number of conversations over the years where we're meeting with a variety of individuals that were Indigenous, worked with Indigenous people, and eventually come into the community, but people that had insight, guidance, and wisdom. And one of those big fears we had at this point in time is, what were we going to do? How were we going to do it? Who else had done this? But really profound for us was, is TRU ready for this? Because we were really testing the boundaries of a very colonized system. Fast forward to 2019, and this is where we began to realize we were doing learning circles with these conversations. And we had a lunch in the summer of 2019 where we invited 12 different people to come and join us and just to talk about PLAR, decolonization, and indigenization. At this point in time, I didn't even know what questions to ask. I just knew we needed to do different. I just had that gut feeling it wasn't working. That little bit of research that we'd done that still didn't feel like it was pointing us in the right direction. And so we had a lunch with some very frank conversations, and it was really illuminating. And but when I think back to that really important step, when I didn't even know what I was communicating, what I was asking for, it just, that feeling of complete overwhelmness and uncertainty was so strong. At the same time, we met a student, an Indigenous student named Justin, and he was trying to go through the competency-based PLAR process and really struggling. And we didn't know how to support him. We'd had other Indigenous students go through PLAR, but in a very colonized way. At this time, we started to do some really surface work, and that's where we started to change or enhance our student resources so that Indigenous students could see themselves better reflected in them. So it was some of the wording that we use, some of that vocabulary, some of the images, trying to expand it in that way. And all this time, as we were looking for this path forward, this image of the buffalo was so important. After that first learning circle where we had the 12 people come for lunch and talked about PLAR, at the end of it, I was talking to one of the participants in the lunch, and he had talked about the buffalo going through the storm. And when I talked about being scared and uncertain, he said, just do what the buffalo do. And, you know, it's like, what did the buffalo do when they go through a storm? And he said they put their head down and they do the work. They take one step at a time. They get a sense of their environment, what's happening around them, and they'll take that next step. They reflect where they are and they'll take that next step, and they take that direct path. So as you can tell, because I'm sharing that today, those words have resonated with all of us for the next few years. So 2020, we were beginning to get a sense of learning what we really needed. And this is, when I say really needed, it's like, you know, the tip of the iceberg. We're not even under the water yet. We just know we need to do better still. And we're having these conversations and we're filling in some of those holes and understanding what we don't know. We also hired an Indigenous PLAR advisor at this time, and we didn't know she was Indigenous. And once we learned that she was Indigenous, there was that uncertainty of making her the Indigenous expert. We couldn't ask her about all things Indigenous, but we wanted to include her in these conversations. And so that was really an important kind of like, how do we walk that path and those boundaries? And also at the time, we'd been working with the student, the Indigenous student, Justin, who was still really struggling with the competency-based PLAR and questioning what we were doing and how we were doing it. And how could we be more equitable and reduce some of these barriers? And how could we do things different? We were still really worried about making mistakes and still really uncertain about the university's rigor and expectations and how we were going to blend that with decolonizing PLAR. So we worked with the student, Justin, to do a pilot project. And I'm just going to share a quick overview of Justin as a student. And then we're going to give him, I'm going to share with you a snippet of an Orange Shirt Day from 2022. But Justin, he he grew up in Blood Vein, Manitoba, on a reserve very far in the northern province. And generational trauma was part of his life up until about the age of 12. And at that time, his mother passed away from cancer. He never met his dad. And once his mom passed away, him and his sister were put in a series of foster homes with more trauma inflicted. And this led to a life of, first it was addiction to alcohol, and then was addiction to drugs. And it's his story to share, so I won't go into too much of that detail. But at 2010, when he found out he was going to become a first-time father, he had this desire to be a good father and to really get out of that trauma, that generational trauma that he was immersed in. And he decided to walk from Kamloops to Blood Vein, Manitoba, which is 2,400 kilometers for anybody who's wondering. Took him 7.5 months, and he called this his walk of healing. It's that reflection, that introspection of how did I get to this place, and how can I be a better person and a better father? And he then moved into, when he finished his walk, he moved into being a mentor. He actually worked at TRU for a short period of time. Then he started to work with urban youth with various traumas and struggles they were living with. Then he expanded his work to working with communities and learning circles, and he calls himself a heart speaker. I'm just going to give you a sense of his voice. I'm going to go to a Facebook video, and I'm just going to give you about 1.5 minutes. And if you just bear with me as I just have to turn on the volume.
Trying our best to sing, to drum, to honor, to pray, to continue doing those kind of things every day. You know, when we first heard of the 215 here in Kamloops to Secwepemc, all the drummers were singing almost every night, every day there was drummers down there singing. It was so beautiful, but hard on our voices. But we were doing that because those songs are prayers. We were doing that because that way of life is an honorable way to live. We were doing that because our ancestors kept it alive so we can continue to walk with it. As hard and as challenging as it is, we are still here. We are still here as Indigenous people. You know, my grandma said to me one time, if you truly want to heal, pray for the ones that hurt you the most. And it's so hard to do that. It's so hard to pray for the ones that hurt you the most. It's talked about learning about compassion. And we have to teach them that, yes, you've done this to us, but I could still sit here, I could still pray for you, and pray that you find it in your heart to see me as a human being, as you see me as a soul just like you. And we're just living on this beautiful, beautiful planet floating through this huge galaxy as a human being family. So I kindly always been asking lots for any racism towards Indigenous people to be held off for a while we grieve and heal. You know, don't be, like, it's so challenging on social media when you see people say, oh, the Indians this, oh, the Indians that. It hurts. And I know that our elders are working so hard to share their stories, so hard to give that gift of their knowledge and to keep our way of life alive. You know, so I want to respect and honor each and every one of you for showing and being here today. It's not easy, but it's worth it. And I really think that we as a human being family can grow into such beauty.
So I wanted to share a snippet of Justin's voice, his oratory skills. When we talked with Justin, when we decided that we needed to do this much different and how we were going to ask him to surface his learning, how we were going to ask him to reflect on it, to share that learning back with us and to assess it, he was really struggling with putting his thoughts from his head. You can see he has no problems with that with an audience and orally, but once it came time to putting it on paper, it was a significant struggle or a challenge. And so we walked a path with Justin that really helped us explore what we were doing and how we were doing it. What we didn't know at the time, and what was really very fortunate for us, is that Justin has profound agency, confidence, patience, he's able to articulate it, articulate what was working, what wasn't working. And really important, he wanted to be part of this journey of doing things different. We didn't know what was working and what wasn't, but we were willing to come together and to explore it. And that combined with other conversations we were having really helped us grow. And Nicole's going to take it from here.
Yeah, so from Justin and from the Indigenous community and bands and from our Indigenous education department at TRU, we just came to, you know, some significant learning. So as you just heard from Susan with Justin, you know, the strong oral history within Indigenous communities and how could we honor that? Grow, trust, and listen. So as we know, Indigenous peoples have a horrific association with educational systems. And we knew we needed to go slowly and regain that trust. And we also knew that if we were going to do this, we couldn't tell them that we're doing it and then backtrack and it not be done at all, because that would just be continuing to break that trust. So we had to be conscious of that, you know, regrowing that trust and listening, having them a significant part of, you know, getting their feedback on what they needed. We also learned that humility is such a huge part of the culture. One of our Indigenous students who went through the PLAR process, afterward, we didn't realize how much, you know, she was having a hard time with it because she was going through it at a time that it was very colonial. And she said afterwards, she said, if my grandmother had have heard me talk that much about myself, she would have rolled over in her grave. She said it was so tremendously hard for her to be talking about herself that much. So we needed to figure out ways around that. And the non-linear, holistic part of their culture and their ways of knowing and being. We, for example, we had a section of the competency-based portfolio that was called the categorization of learning, and asked students to put in dates, for example, of when they, you know, learned about leadership, if that's what they were bringing forward. And Justin had said to us, he said, I don't know how to put dates on this. He said, I've been learning from, you know, from the womb. I've been, you know, he had a challenging time putting it in this, you know, in this box of from this year to this year. And the other thing we needed to start to look at is assessors who would assess the Indigenous knowledge. So we knew it had to be people within the community. Would it be in terms of the Indigenous community? Would it be elders? So this is kind of part of the things we came to learn and consider as time went on. So on your left, this is a graphic recording that one of our brilliant people at TRU, Marie Bartlett, she drew and wrote as a conversation was taking place, one of our initial ones with Indigenous education. So we started also exploring not only with Indigenous education, but what were other post-secondary institutions doing. We went forward and we hired an Indigenous assessor. So as I said with the last slide, we knew we needed people within the Indigenous community to be assessing Indigenous knowledge. It only made sense. And one of our biggest, you know, learnings was around understanding that we're walking this new path and we didn't have a map to follow. So it was both daunting and exciting at the same time. We knew other institutions were walking this path too, which was great. But each has their own areas of access and challenge. And so we realized that, you know, even without this map to follow, we just needed to keep going. We needed to be okay with making mistakes and learning from those. So 2022, our path started to widen. So we began or continued as well, consulting with Indigenous communities, with bands. So part of it was really a big part of doing it with them, not for them. So getting their feedback again, what did they need? The image to the left here is a PLAR retreat that we took, and an Indigenous, well, I would call her youth. She's youth to me. She was, you know, in her 20s, but she told us a stoop text. So it's kind of like an Indigenous story, but it's more significant than that. And she told it in both Secwepemctsín and as well in English. And, you know, as we watched her do this, we realized, you know, even the struggle from going from, you know, an oral history into a written history. And we just, we felt the privilege, and we kind of understood a bit more our biases around students expressing their learning and their experiences and their stories. And then we're here in 2024, Susan and our PLAR Indigenous developers. We will introduce the team at the end, so you can kind of see who's all on the PLAR team. But working with 3 bands currently, deconstructing PLAR, and yeah, approaching it with a radically open pedagogy. Again, taking risks, being okay with making mistakes. And in the next slide, Susan's going to talk a bit more about what we've learned in terms of this.
I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this slide because I think we've covered it in some of our information, but that complete exploration of really expanding our understanding of ways of knowing, and the power and the privilege that comes from that, and the colonized nature of it, and the Indigenous ways of knowing that are so sophisticated and complex, and the importance of the intergenerations and the next 7 generations, the pedagogies, as Nicole was sharing, with the ways of learning that's place-based, experiential, holistic, cumulative, dynamic, and nonlinear. A lot of that, we really had to rethink about what we were doing and how we were doing PLAR. And this last column here, the ways of assessing learning, we're just immersed with communities right now into rethinking about how are we assessing, how can we do it different, how can we do it better, more authentic for the student, how can we make it holistic, how do we include the communities in this, and how do we braid this with what TRU needs. Oh, it's all been very exciting, as Nicole said, moving forward, but still taking so much time to really be careful about what we're doing and how we're doing it, and who's walking this path with us. So the path moving forward, we did receive funding last year, $780,000 for the up till 2025. That's giving us this time and space to work with the communities, to conduct some research, reflect, and adjust what we're doing with decolonizing. And as you can tell, we're definitely moving into the indigenizing realm. And we want to do this not just for Indigenous students, but we've found that everything we're learning is going to benefit all PLAR students. And that's been a really important learning for us. And we also have recognized that this work doesn't have an end date. We're at the very beginning of an ongoing process.